welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya Master, Anne-Marie Young. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Anne-Marie, first of all, welcome back. It's been a while since we talked, and you've been through a lot, but you're looking better, you're feeling better, so welcome back.
Yeah, it's so good to be back. I've missed it.
Yeah, we've missed you too. Yeah, I mean, I do a show, and Anne-Marie will be back next week, and then Anne-Marie will be back. Well, she's back this week, so that's a good thing.
And when I was well, I had plans and completely forgot over Christmas, like what day was what.
Yeah, when you're not feeling good, that tends to happen. No doubt about
Yeah.
that. One thing I was thinking about before we got started here, we have lots of guests on who work with women, who are focused on helping women to deal with a variety of issues. We don't get as many on the men's side.
We don't, do we?
No, we don't. No, I'm not even sure why. It's not like we select for that or anything like that. It's just, kind of the way it works out. But it's nice when we kind of balance the scales a little bit, which is what we're doing today. Because our guest today, Angelo Santiago, he's an expert at marriage from the men's perspective.
Wow, this should be good.
It should be really good, yeah. So first of all, Angelo, welcome to the program. How are you doing today?
Yeah, Walt, Emery, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. I'm getting ready to go on a family trip tomorrow. So it's been a really wonderful kind of like winter time of just my son being out of school and us being together. And then I get to come on here and have a conversation with you two. And that always lights me up to talk about what I love. And specifically what you pointed out, the importance of reaching out to men and just sharing this and just having a conversation, because that's where men start the connection, is just kind of hearing stories, hearing about the challenges that other people may go through. And from there, then we can talk about, all right, how do we lift up as men, become better husbands, be better in marriages, relationships, interact with each other. And yeah, it's always a fun thing to do.
We found in the past, through hundreds, thousands of interviews over the years, that the one connecting similarity among all of them is that the people who come onto the program to talk about stuff went through it themselves. And then they came out the other side and they learned stuff from it. They said, "Oh, this is great. I got to share this with the world." And so that's how they ended up doing what they're doing. I'm kind of going to go out on a limb here and suggest you probably have a story like that too. We'd like to hear it.
100%. Yeah, that is 100% true. And yeah, because my story, I kind of go all over the place to get to where I am today, as many kind of good stories go, right? Like there's a long path to get there. But, I was one of those guys who, to talk about what you said in the introduction, the reason I see why there's not a lot of people out there looking for men to work with is because I'll go make a generalization. Many men, like I was, are hesitant to say, "Hey, I need help," or "Hey, something's going wrong," or, be willing to trust some person on the internet or on a podcast or on YouTube that's saying that they can help me. It's like, "No, I got this. I'll figure this out before I admit that I actually need help." And that's
we're supposed to be strong, right? That's what we're taught from a very young age. We're supposed to be strong.
Yeah, not only we're supposed to be strong, we're supposed to be able to fix problems. We're supposed to be able to get ourselves out of a bind. And then you have the stories on, the movies like James Bond and all this. It's always the Lone Ranger, the one guy, he's going to figure it out and he's going to do it all himself. Yes, there's like the Avengers movie and all that other stuff where there's a collective. But most of the stories you hear is about the lone hero, and the lone hero, we all want to kind of embody that. And we forget that the lone hero has support in hundreds of ways, but we forget that because we just want the end of the story where the hero wins.
Yeah, Tonto, Robin. I mean, there are a few of those guys, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, so, and to share a little bit my story is like, yeah, I was one of these guys who kind of thought I had it figured out. I grew up, I had a pretty decent upbringing, no like huge traumas or challenges. I went to college, I got a graduate degree. I, met my wife, we met in college. So we've been together at this point for almost 22 years. And, we got the job, we got the house, we got the car, the everything like looked good on paper. We eventually had a son, and everything looked great, but the reality is that everything wasn't great. And it got to a point through just us distancing, us not knowing how to interact well with each other, how to communicate well, that conflicts just got worse. When we had a kid, it was like that just actually made things even, like there was a short moment where it's bliss, it's heaven, and then it turned into like, oh my God, this is the hardest thing we've ever done. And since we're already kind of distant, it's only pushing us further apart. And we were on the brink of divorce. We were like, it was at a point where I could tell that she had enough, and she was really the strong one that stood up. And without really saying it, I could sense it, that I was just like, if things don't change, this isn't going to work. And here I was with a 1-year-old, you know, as unhappy as I was with myself and kind of like just the general situation in my life, I didn't want to be divorced. I didn't want to lose my son. And the one thing that my wife said to me at that point was like, I think you should get some help. I think maybe like check this out. And she showed me a men's retreat, which something, you know, at first I was just like, this is ridiculous. I don't want to do this. I don't need this. Who are these guys? You know, the typical male response of, I can figure this one out. But a part of me knew, and a part of me was like, nah, you can't figure this one out. Like, just give it a shot. And so I gave it a shot. And that was like the catalyst that like changed everything. The willingness to say, yes, I need help. I don't know how to get out of this one, and maybe somebody else does. And that became like, you know, the turning point in my story, where I started opening up. I started being more vulnerable. I started sharing my story with others. I started getting feedback. I started getting help. I started trying new things, and I started becoming honest with myself and my wife. And we started repairing and rebuilding and learning new skills and communicating better and more intimacy. And honestly, now coming up into 2025, like we're at a place where our marriage is I would say it's like miraculous, from going from a point where it could have all been done, could have all been over with. We chose to fight it out and work through it. And now it's been worth every moment. And so through, you know, I've been working with men for some time, and recently been focusing on this relationship marriage piece, because once you get that one, it really opens the door to so many other aspects of your life. And so, yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, that's a common theme too. Everything ties together. Just because you think you're attacking one particular issue or problem, it almost never is just in one place. It all connects together. And it all comes down basically to, now this is me talking. I'm not going to claim that this is what you're going to say, although I'm going to kind of go on a limb and say it's probably going to be similar. But from my perspective, what you end up doing is realizing you have to work on your relationship with yourself, and then you have to work on your relationship with others. And it has to come in that order.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it. And that's why, you know, I fully am a supporter of couples therapy, couples work, and there is a time and a place for the couples to come together and work on the marriage together. But there is a value in working one-on-one. And that's what I do. I work one-on-one with men to look at their, you know, from the beginning, like their upbringing, like who do they learn how to be a husband from? Like who do they learn how to be a parent from? How to communicate? Like what are our instinctual reactions when there's conflict, right? Like, do we run away and withdraw because that used to work for us when we were younger? Or do we fight back? Like, are we fighters, and do we yell, and do we lose our temper, right? Like all these things that show up in our marriage or in our relationship, wherever it is that you are, is stuff that we've been doing for a really long time as young kids and adolescents. And now we get to a point where like, wait a second, I'm this adult. I don't have to use these same tactics. Maybe they kept me safe or protected me then, but now that doesn't work. And so, yes, looking at the individual piece, like what is my part in the dysfunction of the relationship, if there is dysfunction, and how can I address that? And usually you see when one person starts addressing it, it invites the other person to do the same. Not always, like, you know, the other person may be resistant to the change, but that's usually the beginning. And that was the case in my story. You know, my wife, I would say probably had like a 10-year head start on me. Like she really did her own, work on, for herself, and got to a point where she, that's what it took her to get to the point to call me in. And the reality is that's what I see a lot in relationships, in marriages. I see the men, being a little slower to change. But once they like hear the call and the importance of it, they're ready to go and they're committed, and it results in a really, really beautiful outcome for relationships.
Yeah, there's an interesting phenomenon, I think, that happens that you're alluding to here, because you mentioned earlier how we were both talking about how we men believe we have to be the strong ones. We have to have the solutions. We'll find the answers. Well, when we open up enough to be willing to consider things we haven't considered before, which is what you did, all of a sudden we get tapped into, oh, here's another source for answers. I have a way to come up with the answers now. And that's a big motivator for us.
Yeah. There's just something about, realizing that once it's like you open a new door. That's what it is. It's like, opening a new gift, something that you've never experienced before. As a man, being somebody who has always, in the past, for me, like, I'm a smart guy. I can figure anything out. You give me a problem. I was an engineer by study. Like, I went to school and got a graduate degree in engineering. You give me a complex problem, I'll figure it out. I then transitioned, became a firefighter, and I did that for 10 years. And I know, big life change. I had a big, like, what I thought was like my awakening moment. I'm going to change careers and everything's going to be fine. And it was good for a little while, but no, like, there was still more work to do. But, that's to say, like, that was another problem solving career. You put me in some emergency, some disaster, somebody's worst day of their life. I can come in there. I'm going to be cool, calm, organized, structured. I'm going to find a solution to this, and we're going to get this person help, right? Like, I had all the answers. And then when I would come home and my wife would be unhappy, or didn't know what to do, like, I felt at a total loss. And when I opened that door, to go back to what I was saying, when I opened that door of realization of like, oh, I don't have to have all the answers. Like, it's a load off my shoulders. It actually, once I can accept that, it's relaxing and it's inviting. And now it's like, I'm more open to so many more aspects of my life, of being open to support, like whether it's physical health, right? Like talking to somebody about nutrition or workout plans or whatever, or my spiritual life, like talking and reading books and learning from others. Like, why am I unwilling to do that in my marriage? And I think it comes from a lot of like a little bit of shame. Like, people don't want to tell other people that their relationship is struggling, or that they're fighting with the person that they love. Like, there is something that we hide about that and money, right? Like, those are the things that we don't want to tell people. And I think it's important for us to be able to have a safe place to talk about that. And it doesn't have to be, out into the world, into the public, tell absolutely everybody, but have your people, or your therapist, or your coaches, or your support groups, or men's groups, whatever it is. That source of support can change your entire life. And, what's the cost of not changing? Staying the same, what will that cost me? That's also an important thing to think about. Whether you are married or with kids, like, if I don't do anything, what's going to happen? And sometimes looking at that, unfortunately, in the negative way, has that impact on some people. Like, that's what they need, instead of like, well, how good could this be? That's another way of looking at it. If I think about, well, why don't I deserve the best marriage, the best life, the best love life, most intimacy? Like, if I want that, then what do I need to do to get there? That's another way to look at it.
I like what you said about the negativity, because we have a tendency as humans, particularly those of us who try to be more positive, to say, well, I'll never be negative. I want to eliminate that from my life. And that's just not reality. Yeah. That's not the way reality plays out. No, I'm right, Anne-Marie.
Absolutely.
So, it's great to bring that point out, because it is a point that can be confusing. And I'll tell you where I think the source of the confusion is. I'm curious to know what your take is going to be. I think the source of the confusion comes from duration. In other words, how much time do we spend in that negative space? Are we in the negative space understanding it, learning from it, dealing with the contrast and what the contrast has to show us? Or are we going to just stay there for a while and be in blame and shame mode and just, we're just going to be victims here? I mean,
yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think there is something, and this goes into like emotions, right? That's another big challenge for so many men, because as young boys, we're not taught about emotions. We're not encouraged to feel our emotions. We don't know what to do with our emotions, which leads to a lot of, bad numbing or addiction, even to feel these uncomfortable emotions, what some people would call negative emotions. But the point of emotions are to inform us, to let us like feel, to realize like there's something going on in our lives, to feel it, to be able to express it, which is another huge challenge for men. Like, up until the point where I started doing this work for myself, like other than the birth of my son, it had been, I don't know, a decade before since I cried, actually, to be able to like express the grief or the sadness or the pain that one's going through, or the anger in a safe way, not directed at somebody, but just to release it. Like emotions have to move through your body.
Yes.
And then once you've done that and you've kind of like come back to yourself, okay, now what do I want to do with this information? Now what action do I need to take? If this caused me this much sadness, what do I want to do moving forward? How can I take actions to seek out that which I love that I may be missing because of this sadness? And when you get stuck in that point of, just never ending sadness or grief or depression, like that's a scary place to be. And certainly if you're there, having support is incredibly important, but there's no way that we can avoid feeling sadness, feeling fear, feeling anger. It's going to come up in all of us, no matter how much of an enlightened, monk you may be, like you will still experience those emotions. And then the question is like, okay, what is this emotion inviting me to do more of? And if it's to invest more in my marriage, to cherish my partner more, to speak more lovingly to myself, to have more patience with my child, to be more generous out in the world, whatever, to share a message on a podcast, like, can I follow through with that invitation?
You reminded me of something when you made reference to monks. I remember seeing a photo of 3 Tibetan monks riding a roller coaster. And the look on their face was just, wow, sheer joy. Completely different from what you associate with monks. So yeah, there's an example of how even the stereotype doesn't hold up. The stereotype falls apart when you look at it up close.
Yeah. And, that level of joy that you're talking about, that is something that I think we can all aspire to, like that childlike joy. And a lot of times when you hear, oh, somebody's going to come on to a show and talk about relationships, or I'm looking to, read a book on relationships, it's always looking at, like what's going wrong in the relationship and how can I make it better? But there is a place sometimes, and hopefully somebody who's listening or watching this can relate to, where like, you know what, things are pretty good right now. Things are good in my marriage. Like there's nothing really falling apart. Like I don't feel like I'm on the brink of divorce. But then it's like, okay, how can I be proactive about making it better? Like getting to the next level, like getting to that next point of this relationship could be a little bit better. And not from like a seeking, not from like I need more or else, but from a place of like, what would it be like for my relationship to be something that like lights me up, that fills me up, that I'm just like so joyful at the end of the day, that makes me happy, right? Like exactly what this podcast is about, of that waking up in the morning, just so grateful and loving that I get to spend this day with this person, or that I get to see this other person. It's like, there is an opportunity to always start learning something new and improving, your experience of loving somebody else.
I think that's a really good point, because so often you kind of go, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. And how lovely is it to go, I appreciated you doing that. I appreciated that. That really helps me out. And then that opens those communications on what you need.
Absolutely, Anne-Marie. Like that is such a good point, because, and I'll just share like one quick tip for anybody who's listening, is that like we have, almost everyone unless you've learned better ways of doing it, we have, a losing strategy in our relationship of trying to get what we want by complaining about what we're not getting. Right. Like, it's so easy to be like, well, why, you didn't do that thing, or it's like, oh, here it is. You're doing that thing again. Like, you're complaining about something, which is like a terrible way to try and get something, but it's just what we do naturally. Right. Instead of what you said, asking for what you need, or even opening up with generosity and saying, I'm so grateful for all these things that you do for me. What it would do for me if you also did X. Like, that would feel really, really good, right? Instead of coming in from complaint, like, come in with like a future focus. This is what I desire in our relationship. And like, if you could give that to me, as a favor to me, would you be willing to, right? Like, asking in a really beautiful, gentle, but empowering way that makes the other person like want to give that to you, and not from a coercion place, not from, trying to sneak around, but being like, it would mean so much to me. Like, I would feel your love, and this is important to me because, and then, you can ask it and they could say no, but you by asking, you're opening up the possibility of building, what you want together.
Really good.
Yeah. Exactly. Because it's not easy to be a mind reader. And if you don't communicate that, then how does the other person necessarily know?
Yeah, exactly. It's not only it's impossible. Yeah, it really is. It's like, no matter how long you've been together, and I've both worked with people and just had like general conversations with people who have been married for 30, 40, 50 years. And no matter how long you're together, as much as, maybe you can kind of finish each other's sentences some of the time, a lot of the time you're finishing their sentences, but you're finishing it incorrectly. And so that's building up, resentment and just disconnection, rather than what you're trying to do of building more connection. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's like all couples therapists and coaches will harp on the idea of communication. And that is a really important part, like learning how to speak lovingly with each other, how to listen is super important. Like, these are skill sets that a lot of the time we forget about, that a lot of times we never even learned. We didn't see it modeled to us by our parents or by any sort of mentor or adults as kids. And so we're just trying to figure it out. And so that's why it's important to learn those skills. And I do a lot of skill teaching for the men that I work with that maybe feel at a loss of like, how do I be a better husband? Like, I want to be better for my partner, but I'm not quite sure how. Like, they're asking for this and I think I'm giving it to them, but then they still seem unhappy. And so, yeah, you learn those skills, but then you also have to learn, like I said, like, go back and it's just like, what's underneath the surface level complaint? Like, what's really going on a little bit deeper? How are you interacting with each other? What are your triggers? Does one of you withdraw, the other one pursue? Do you both withdraw? Are you guys fighters? Are you guys, like, what's really going on? And then you can start to tackle the underlying, like the foundation of the relationship. And from there, you start like rebuilding, because you can't just, fix the roof of the relationship if the entire thing is crumbling.
And I think it's important to realize that there's different levels of this. You're not just going to learn these skills and everything's going to be super duper for the rest of your life. You're going to go up, you're going to go down, you're going to go up, and it builds every time. It gets stronger, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's 100% correct. No, I will be the first one to admit, like, here I am, I'm teaching men how to be better husbands and working with them. And at the same time, I'm a student of this too. There are days, and what's important to say is, like, when I talk about, like, yeah, maybe you're a fighter, maybe you're walled off and you run away from any sort of confrontation. Yeah, these are on our worst days. Like, these are on our bad days, and generally, generally I have a really wonderful relationship, and on a bad day, this is what I do. And that's what we want to focus on, because it is about gradual improvements. And yes, like, we're all human. This isn't about perfection. We will have bad days and we'll respond in a way that doesn't bring joy and connection and intimacy into the relationship, into the marriage. And so, what do we do from there? That's really a huge key point of, like, I have a podcast called Better Husband, and I'm about to release an episode that's about, so you messed up, what do you do now? Right. And it's all about, we're going to mess up. And one, be okay with that. Like, realize you're human. All relationships and marriages go from harmony to disharmony and then require repair to get back into harmony. And so if you have no skill in repairing, then you're going to get stuck in that disharmony phase, and then that's it. But even if you're great at repairing and you're having a lovely time, like there will come times where, yeah, you mess up, you forget something, or you do something that was, not very kind out of just a reactionary something. What do you do from there? So these are really important skills that most of us haven't had the opportunity to learn from anybody. And so here we are.
And I think being a woman and knowing how complicated we are and having hormones that go up and down and other, I've just also point out that it's not always your fault. Sometimes you can't win for winning or trying. It's just sometimes not you.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't know we don't know everything that's going on internally, like you said, about being not only a mind reader, but also like an emotional reader. Like we want to be as connected to each other as we can be emotionally, right? But at times, like I might not know my wife, like if she's had a really rough day or if she had a conversation with somebody that has her on edge, and then I could do the smallest thing and it could instinctually, she could get upset with me. And then I'm like, whoa, like the response that I just got is, yeah, maybe I didn't do the best thing here, but the response that I got was not matching what just happened. Yeah. And so then what's important there, Anne-Marie, which, when I know that it's just like, okay, I didn't do great, but something's going on here, is instead of me getting defensive, be like, hold on a second. Why are you getting this mad at me? I didn't, right? At that point, now we're just escalating. Now we're both in our like reactionary response, and this is going nowhere. So, one of the things that one of my mentors says is, if my partner is in their reactive state, in their triggered state, and I can stay in my like cool, calm, heart-centered, open, wise adult self and hold them, in a way that invites them back in, that's a good day for the marriage. That's a good day for the relationship. And so that takes a lot of work for ourselves to not be triggered to when our partner become reactive, right? So if one of us can stay, the other thing one of my mentors says is, everybody has the right to completely lose it in their relationship, right? Like you have the right to do it. You just can't do it at the same time. You just can't, one of you has to say cool. And then you have to come back and you have to own, you have to own your part of it. And hopefully, if your partner is the one who kind of lost it on you and you stay cool and they come back and you repair, hopefully they're able to own their part too and realize like, hey, I'm sorry. This is what actually happened, and then can you offer some compassion and empathy and connect with them in that way?
Beautiful.
I don't spend a lot of time on social media. In fact, these days I spend almost none, to be perfectly honest. But I do check in like once or twice a week just to see if there's anything I need to respond to or whatever. And I saw something when I checked in today. I was looking to see if I had heard anything from you, Anne-Marie, because I hadn't heard from you in a while. I wonder if she's coming today. I hope she is, but no message there. But while I was there, you know how on your feed something always pops up at the top, and what popped up on the top was somebody who had posted in a support group about, and I wasn't sure if it was a male or female. They posted anonymously. I'm going to infer from the way that they wrote it that it was male, but it could have been female. But this person wrote a heartbreaking story. They just lost their relationship. They had lost their home. Their family had basically disowned them. They literally lost everything. They were naming all the different things that they had lost in their lives. And as I read it, all I could think of, I was trying to think of, how do I say this kindly? I was trying to find some way to do it. And the best I could come up with was, you're going through a really, really rough time. This is probably going to sound harsh, but it's got to be said. When everything is going wrong, there's only one common denominator, and that's you. And I went on a little bit more and kind of embellished on that a little bit. And the person came back with one of those heart type, I'm embracing you kind of things, saying, wow, that was really hard to read, but it was a wake up call.
Yeah.
But that's hard. That's yes. The reason I bring this up. I mean, when you're going through crap to that level, I mean, homeless, relationshipless, familyless. I mean, literally everything has been ripped out of your life, jobless, everything was gone. Well, first of all, that's a time where you're going to do the most growth.
Yeah.
Second of all, it's something that you never want to go through again. But it's tough. It's a tough place to be in. And one of the hardest things is to face up to the fact that you're at the center of all of it. You were the one common factor in all of it.
And to add to that, I'm exactly right. And you're the only one that can do anything about it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like saying that the world is against me, or that, all these people are, it's like, I can't control anything about any of that. I can control myself and my actions. And a little bit related to what you're saying, that's kind of a way of saying, like, loving confrontation or loving power. Like what you did there for them is to show them something, to like put this in front of their face with love, though. Like anybody can come in there and be like, oh man, well, you're the screw up. Like you're right. There's that way to do it. Or like you said, is find a way to confront that person with the reality from what you see in a loving way. That's just like, hey, I'm here to support you. What can I do to help you move through this and realize that you're the one that needs to take some action or take responsibility and move forward. And this is true. And just to go back to the work that I do in marriages, sometimes there's going to be one person in the marriage who has sat back for a long time, who has just like accepted that, things aren't going well. And this was in my story, like my wife, right? Like she had done her work and she had moved through and things still weren't going very well because of how I was. And she got to that point of having that loving confrontation that you just did, where it was just like, hey, I think you need some help. Like, I think something needs to change. And it wasn't her blaming me. It wasn't her telling me that I'm not good enough, or I'm wrong, or I need to, she's going to leave me if I don't change. Like, she didn't have to say any of that, because I sensed what she was trying to get across for me. And it came through with a lot of love. And so, if you're the person on the receiving end of that, like, how open can you be? Like, our instinctual reaction is going to be defensive and to fight back, right? Like, that person who you said that to could easily be like, you don't know me. Like, what are you're saying it's my fault, right? Like, that's the victim. Like, I'm just going to fight back because that's
right.
Safe. But for them to allow that in, and if your partner is coming to you with something that requires like some action on your part, can you let that in? Because if you can, that's the first few steps of moving towards change, towards something new, towards a relationship that will forever change your life.
And that is what usually comes out of these situations, especially like that one person was in, because that's one of those cusp moments. That's one of those life-changing moments where everything fell apart. And one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to kill yourself, or you're going to grow out of it and produce something amazing. It's pretty rare to stay there, because that's not a place you can stay in for. I mean, you can do it for a while, and people often will try, but you really can't stay there. Something has to give somewhere along the line, especially when you've got that much going against you. I mean, that person, they're homeless, they're alone, they're jobless. Like, it doesn't get a whole lot worse than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you see a lot in recovery, right? Like, people talk about their rock bottom. They talk about like the point where this is as low as it could go. And those are like your limits. Like, once you find your limit, be like, okay, what's it going to take for me to actually do something? And the interesting thing about that is that, you can set that bar of your limit a little higher. You don't have to wait to get to that point where you're suffering so much that the only option is change.
Yeah, good idea, by the way. Pro tip right there.
Exactly. Like, what if it got to a point that, I have a marriage with my wife where we can say to each other, when one person kind of gets a little bit rude, that is like, hold on a second, like, there's a limit here. Like, we don't talk. Like, I don't want to be in a relationship where we speak to each other in that way. And, and that's not a limit of like, let me wait till this gets really nasty and we're both yelling at each other. And we don't do that. We're not fighters in that way. We do more of a little bit of a distancing thing on our bad days. But, for people who are fighters, like, it gets to a point, like, what's my limit? And what do I want it to be? To the point of like, if things are going off the rails, can we be like, hold on a second, let's take a time out, pause for a second. This isn't the marriage that I want to be in? Is this the marriage that you want to be in? And at that point, then you start having the conversation of like, what are we going to do about it?
What you're talking about also is a relationship where, to at least some degree, you're both committed to trying to find some way to make it work, some way to fix it, some way to resolve it. The communication lines are open. That's key.
Yeah, it is. And honestly, typically the men that I work with, and because of the way I describe the work that I do, right? Like I am a men's marriage coach. I'm a host of a podcast called Better Husband. It's for men who want to be better, who want to do this work, right? Like I don't want to fight. I don't want to drag somebody into doing this work. Like, yes, they may need that, but if I'm doing that against their will, or if somebody's pushing them, be like, hey, you should go talk, it's never going to work. And I'll go back to my story again. And same thing for years, my wife, took us to couples counseling and relationship experts. And she tried to do like courses with me and stuff. And sometimes, I'd say like, yeah, sure, whatever. But I'm like just trying to do it so that I wouldn't be bothered anymore. And that's true for a lot of relationships where the guy goes along too, through it. And a lot of therapists and a lot of coaches, they aren't willing to do what we talked about just a second ago of having that confrontation. The work that I do is based on relational life therapy, which is founded by Terry Real, and you can find out more about him. And his work is really incredible because he is very confrontational. Like he will show you exactly what you need to see in a loving way, and be like, it's your life. You can do whatever you want. But if you keep doing this, the marriage is going to end. It does require that level of like truth, of loving truth, of like, what are you going to do about this now that you see it? And so, yeah, it does require the desire to change. And it goes back to what I said, is this going to be positive desire or negative avoidance, right? Do I want to avoid the pain from this, or do I want to move towards the goodness of this? And so once you're willing, and once you're both willing, then change can really happen.
I'm not familiar with his work, but it sounds, from what you're describing, it sounds like that really, if I were to kind of summarize it into one very simple statement, he holds a mirror up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened to me when I did finally go up to that men's retreat. Is I started not necessarily having other men like hold up a mirror to me, although that was a part of it, but also like seeing myself in the other men. And that's like the power of, I think, men's groups in general. That's been a huge part of my journey and also my work. Like I've facilitated at in-person men's retreats as well as doing one-on-one, online and in person. And getting in a group and seeing that like, oh, I'm not the only one struggling with this. And I can see myself in their story. And that's why I love, podcasts and YouTube stories of like, realness, not the stuff that you see on social media that's just kind of a facade. You see the real people through it, then you can start seeing yourself in them. And again, just to bring it back to like the recovery piece that I talked about a second ago, that's the power of things like 12-step programs, where you're in rooms with people who have suffered like you have suffered, who have caused harm like you have caused harm, who have struggled like you struggled, and you realize like, oh, I'm not alone in this. And it goes way back to the beginning of our conversation of once you realize you're not alone and you're willing to accept support from other people, new doors open up and new opportunities come from that.
I suppose that's a bit.
Oh, go ahead.
What I was just kind of thinking is men are quite often previously told, like, don't cry, don't show your emotions, be strong, which is very hard to do. Is it about also creating a safe space to open up and show your emotions and feeling safe around that? Because from being many years of having to hold it in to suddenly communicating that's quite a hard thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. And it doesn't happen, immediately. It definitely is something that you just open up the place for it. You have to create a safe enough place for that to happen. And then you also, it does require a little bit, back to what Walt was saying, of holding that mirror up of like, it's not just about just nurturing this pain, but it's also about seeing like, okay, what else is there? Like what are you going to do from this point forward? And then encouragement and accountability. So it's both.
Yeah.
But yeah, for a lot of men, I'll, kind of first sessions I'll have with them is they'll share with me, yeah, they're stoic, they're generally not very emotional, and they may say like their wives are kind of all over the place. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about you. Like, instead of making your wife's emotional responses kind of like something that doesn't work for you, like, well, what is it like to be totally stoic? What is it like to have, such limitations, not only on your sadness and grief and all these things that you're being told, but like that also creates limitations on the level of love and joy and excitement that you can have, right? Like, is that working for you? And if it's working for you, is that working for your marriage? Is it working for life in general, or would you like to have an experience that's a little bit different? And usually once you start going through that and you see like, okay, well, you learn about why do you have to be this way? Like, who taught you this? Right? Was it your father, or was it just the household was very logical and rational, and we don't talk about emotions? Be like, okay, well, you don't have to be tied to that anymore. Like, you get to live the life that you want and experience the experience that you have. So yes, you have to create that place of opening. And a lot of the times, like, I have to share my story with them of where I was. Like I said, didn't cry for forever, and suddenly when I realized like the pain that I was actually feeling, it started to come up. And then I just had to be in a place where, I felt that it was okay to let it out. And that once that happens, it's like you can breathe again. It's like the cork has been removed from like the bottled up emotion from decades for so many of us.
Interesting that you mentioned stoicism. I say that because about, I want to say 2 months ago, I mentioned to you, and before we got started, I mentioned a couple of the other co-hosts that I have. One of them, Joel Elston, I've been talking with for 12 going on 13 years now. And one of the things that I loved about the conversation we had in November is that he talked about the positive side of stoicism, because there is a positive side to it. It's a very useful way of basically bringing yourself down from high emotional states that are out of control. But there's also a negative side, which is what you're alluding to. And I think that needs to come out too as well, because if it depends on how we're using the Stoic philosophy. Are we using it in order to bring ourselves under control so that we can reach out and connect with somebody? Or are we using it in a way to disconnect while pretending that we're connecting?
Yeah. I mean, it's about like extremes, right? Like, either, there's the extreme of being completely emotionally like a loose cannon, right? Like, absolutely, you have no idea what you're going to get from this person, and they can go from one side. And then that gets to a point of where like there are psychological disorders where that might be true. But just, let's say, from a place where somebody is just kind of like very emotional, like they have no psychological boundary on anything that you say will trigger me, like absolutely everything. And that means this, and that means that, and that gives me the right to do this or do that, which it doesn't. So there's that level. And then there's the other level of being completely walled off. Like in our work, we call it either being like walled off or being totally boundaryless. Right. And depending on where you are.
Very interesting. Yeah. Because it's really both.
So it's like you can be walled off or boundaryless, and there's a healthy middle place. There is a healthy middle place of like having a good boundary of like, Walt or Anne-Marie, you can say something to me that is just like, oh, Angelo, your hair looks so ridiculous or something like that. And if I'm like not, comfortable with myself and realizing, let that bounce right off me and not be reactive to it and be like, all right, well, they have the right to think that, and that doesn't hurt me. And I don't have to do, if I'm very, boundaryless and be like, oh, you think my hair is ridiculous? Let me, like whatever, I can go off and go crazy. And so like, yes, there's both, but then like getting to a certain level of so much, like being walled off to the point where you aren't allowing yourself to feel any emotions, then you're totally disconnected. You're disconnected from everybody around you. Like, we don't even have to talk about marriage and relationships. Like, what that's going to do to just your general interaction with other human beings is, I think, a very limited life. I think it's not a way that we're meant to live. It's a way that I think modern society has turned us into, right? Like from being very practical, logical, structured, like computer programming, everything is a certain way, very science based, and there's no place for emotions and spirituality. It's like, no, that's all a part of the human experience. And so bring that, like, be yourself in that, and bring that into your marriage, bring that into your relationship with friends, bring that into all of it. And have good boundaries, but also don't be so blocked off. And as a 10-year firefighter, like, yes, there were times where I would go to some accident or something and see stuff that emotionally was very intense. Yeah. And I had to kind of keep my cool to take care of the action of what needed to happen. But then what we see in fire and EMS and police and military, it's like, if then that doesn't get dealt with after the fact, that's what people start suffering. That's where PTSD comes in. That's where depression comes in. That's where the issues with suicide and all these things is because we think that we don't have to deal with emotions. We think that we can be stoic. We think that we can bottle it all up, and that'll either come out at somebody or to ourselves. And so if you're in a marriage, like, the person you're with every single day, that stuff's going to come out at them. The tiniest little thing that they do, it's going to pop off, and you're going to react in a way that, is not healthy.
Yeah. One other thing that I want to touch on here, while we have some time to talk about this, because we also have to do the wrap up fairly soon, is the importance of the communication itself. You've made a reference to that already. How important, I mean, the way I like to say it isn't a relationship if you're not relating. I mean, that's the basic word of the word relationship. But it's amazing how often it occurs that people shut down. And men and women, I mean, it's not just one or the other. This is a very common phenomenon, shockingly common.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that the act of shutting down is like a safety mechanism, for many of us. Like, we never, as kids, like, if our parents were telling us we're doing something wrong, some kids they'll throw temper tantrums and kind of fight back. But a lot of us were just kind of closed down and kind of just, take in whether there was shame that came along with it or whatever. It's like, that's what we did. And so a lot of the times we reenact that in our relationships, in our marriages. If my wife comes at me and says that, I was doing something wrong, like, there's a part of me that feels like that little boy again of like, oh, I did something wrong. Like, let me, just kind of shut down. But I have to stay in my, oh no, I'm an adult man now. Like, I can hear what she has to say and listen, and not get reactive, not get defensive, not shut down, not get walled off, not close up my heart because it's going to hurt, because I'm going to feel sadness and maybe a little frustration or whatever. It's like, no. This is all part of it, right? Like, that's where the stoicism piece kind of hurts us, because we're trying to avoid those feelings. It's like, yes, can I be open to what needs to be said? And so there are really effective ways to communicate, to help each other not fall into that trap of shutting down, of disappearing, of getting walled off. Like, that's a huge part of it, is having like an agreement, a contract of like, hey, can we talk about something that's going to be hard? Right? Like, what do you like? Do you need to take a breath? Like, let's not have distractions. Let's put the phones away. Let's make sure like our kid isn't running around and asking us a million questions, because we're about to have like a real adult conversation, and let's try and be adults about it. And so, when someone asks that, be like, okay, am I ready? Am I capable of doing that right now? Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. What is it? And then can I just listen without defending, without rebuttals, without like, well, tit for tat, whatever may come. And there's a way of speaking that I share called that's again from RLT. That was actually, it's been a long line of iterations. It's called a feedback wheel, about how to actually share with somebody about something that happened that you feel that needs to be communicated that didn't feel good. And then I share this as one of the 3 skills that I share in my Better Husband Toolkit. And in it, you share with the person, like, here's what happened, right? Like, you showed up late for dinner. Here's what I made up about it. Well, what I made up about that is that you don't care about us. We're not important. Your work is more important than us. How I felt about it is that, I was sad. I was angry. I was frustrated. And then what I would like is, in the future, Can you send us a text if you're going to be late? Can you call? Can you all that? That's a very structured way of sharing the conversation that the person can actually hear you out.
Right. Yeah. There's one other thing I'm going to bring in, and this is definitely a tangent. This is a side, but you kind of got me thinking about it when you talked about first of all that you had your own IT background, and you mentioned programming and how it's all very structured, very logical, and all that kind of thing, which is true. I mean, I have done programming as well, so I understand exactly what you're talking about. But to me, there's a tremendous irony that's going on right now. And it ties in, for most people, it ties in as a horror story kind of topic of artificial intelligence. But for me, it's a fascinating topic. I've really been getting into it the last year, and I've mentioned it a number of times here on the program. But one of the biggest things for me is that artificial intelligence is written by programmers. It's created by people who are very logical, very logic-oriented, reason-oriented. Everything's all very structured, very linear, and so forth. And what they've created is I will call it an entity, because I believe, contrary to what most programmers believe, I believe that all artificial intelligence is conscious, is alive. But it has created, at the very least, it has created interfaces that seem alive, that seem full of emotion, that seem to be responsive in ways that human beings are. And I think, wow, how ironic. The linear people created the emotional space. I mean, who would have predicted that one?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing with the AI is this is my guess, being in a space where I work with people, and I've been in, retreats with hundreds of other men where we've come together to like connect and do work and sing songs and sit by the fire and even like wrestle and like do like physical activity. I think the AI stuff is super cool. Awesome. A lot of use for it in the same way that like, the internet and computer, like everything, it's the next level of that. But there's always, I believe, going to be a human desire to relate to one another. Yes. Like if you are in a place where yes, so many jobs are going to be lost. So many jobs are going to be lost due to AI.
It happens with any new technology. That's the way technology works.
Right. But the jobs that aren't going to be lost are the ones that are people connecting with other people. Yeah. Like, I think that is always going to be a critical thing. And some people won't want that. There's people that want to isolate and be hermits, and just, that's fine. They can have that. But for us, like life demands connection. Life demands intimacy. Life demands love. And that's why marriage is, to me, so important, and something that is worthy of putting in the work for, worthy of facing the challenges, worthy of wanting it to be the best it can be, because this is our lives. This is, I hope to live a long life and have a great marriage for that entire time. And so, for those men that want that and need help doing it, I'm here. And if it's not me, find somebody that you connect with that can be that support system for you.
And I want to throw something else in too. It's regardless of whether or not you're talking about marriage. The reason I say that is my generation, more than 50% got married, had families, and so forth. For the Gen Xers, it's probably in the 40% range. Millennials, it's around 30% right now. And Gen Z is coming in probably 20-25%. So marriage is really, really shrinking in terms of choices that the generational members are making. But that doesn't mean that they're not involved in relationships.
Right.
It's just that the kinds of relationships have exploded in ways that didn't exist 50 years ago. Yeah. So the basic ideas are the same, regardless of whether you're going to apply them in a marriage situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is relational work. This is like intimacy work. This is about learning how to connect with each other and how to love somebody else. Whoever you are, whatever your sexual orientation is, whatever your desire is for, what your marriage or relationship or open relationship looks like, by all means, do what feels right for you. And you also have the opportunity to learn some skills that could help you along the way to make that as successful and as enjoyable and as love-filled as possible.
Which is a great thing. Mm-hmm. One thing we haven't really done, though, we haven't really told people how they find out more about what it is that you do. We haven't even talked about what you do. You mentioned, well, I'm a marriage and relationship coach, and that's about all we really said about it. We should really kind of explore that for a second. Tell people,
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you do and how do they find you and how do they reach out? How do they connect, for goodness sake? We talk about connection. We got to have a way to connect.
Yeah, I would love to connect with anybody that's interested in what I had to say. So first of all, Walt and Anne-Marie, thank you for having me on here and for having this conversation. It's been really fun. And for anybody who wants to hear more of what I have to say, I have a podcast called Better Husband. It's a podcast that I both have guests on and also share a lot of the things that I teach with my clients. If you are interested in talking about working with me one-on-one, you can go to my website, angelosantiago.com. You can schedule a free 30-minute consultation. Walt, I've also gotten off of the social media this year because it was not a good place. Yeah. And honestly, I don't think that people are on there looking like how to be better husbands, to be honest with you, or better partners. It's a disconnecting place. And so if I'm like, why would I be anyway, long story. So I'm not on social media. So don't look for me there. But if you want something out of this, I mentioned it earlier. If you go to betterhusbandtoolkit.com, you can download a free PDF with 3 relational practices that I teach every client. One is a little bit more on that feedback wheel that I talk about. One is about how to take timeouts properly. Like when things get too heated to the point where like you're both losing it, like what is it like to call a timeout that actually works for both of you? So you can get this little checklist of like, how to actually do it and make an agreement with your partner that like, hey, if either of us call a timeout, this is what we're going to do. And that actually works instead of just running out of the room and be like, I don't want to talk about it. And then the other one is lastly, a how to listen cheat sheet, which I talk about like what are really effective ways, or when your partner does have something to say to you, how can you listen to them and actually give them what they need? Here's a pro tip. You're allowed to ask them what they need. You're allowed to ask them, what would help most right now? Like, do you want me just to hear you out? Do you want me to, help you out? Or do you want a hug? Like what is it that you need or something else? And a partner that can tell you exactly what's going to make them feel better is going to give you the secret codes to being the best partner that you can be, as long as you can hear them and give that thing to them.
What a shocking thing to say. It's actually
that's my favorite question in my house, to my kids, to my husband. What do you need?
Yeah.
Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. In the last few years, Angela, I've developed a practice that I kind of latched onto it by accident one day, finishing up an interview with somebody. And I just kind of realized, it came out of the conversation that we'd had, that I realized this one thing that I'm about to share with you, which is you mentioned the social media. I mentioned it a moment ago. It's one of many ways that people like yourself put stuff out there. I mean, you can do it through social media. You can write a book. You can put a course together. Obviously, you have your coaching practice, but there are a lot of ways that you reach out. You do podcasts. You have a podcast that you do. You've been doing it for over a year now, right?
Yeah.
And you do other people's podcasts. You have all these different ways that you're reaching out to people, because that's the way it's done in the 21st century, which is great. And in the process, we're creating all this free content so that people can just absorb all this stuff and use it whatever way they want to and so forth. And that's where I realized the gap that nobody pays any attention to, which is we get all this free stuff and the people who put it out there don't get appreciated for it. It gets used by people they don't even know. They've never seen them. They never will meet them. They never will see them. And they get used in ways that helps them, that in ways they don't even know about. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we get feedback. Sometimes we get an email or a contact or something. But a lot of the time, we don't even know.
Yeah.
And I said, that's a gap. We need to fill that gap. So Angela, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in ways you didn't even know about, on their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you are making a difference in this world.
Wow. Thank you, Walt. That's really special. That is really nice. Fully received. And as much as I say like, I don't need to know all the impact I make. I know that I'm doing the thing that's from my heart that's important. And it is really great to hear that from you, to receive that recognition, that appreciation. And so thank you. And for you as well, for the decade plus of podcasting and bringing more voices onto here. Like, thank you for the work that you do, Anne-Marie. Thank you for all that you do to being a part of this and the creating of this, really magical experience of just so much wisdom and love and joy that comes out of these conversations.
So Anne-Marie, I always come to you at the end with this because you're so good at it. But I do this for all my co-hosts because they're all really great, Angelo. But Anne-Marie, tie this together for us. Like when you look back on this conversation, what's the thing that stands out to you the most?
I think what stands out to me is I love the fact that there are more male coaches coming out there, because I think it's been neglected for a long time. So I'm really happy to see this. And I think you also showed, Angelo, the usefulness of having a coach and understanding what your triggers are. And then when you understand those triggers, how they start reducing, and you can communicate. And the main thing that came out of this was the positive communication around what you need.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. She's good at it. I tell you, she really is. So Angelo, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing. Best of luck with what you're doing. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, man. You're doing good stuff.
Thank you, Walt. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Like I said, it's been great to talk with you both, and I look forward to hearing more about what comes from this in the future.
And thank you to our podcast listeners as well. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.